unpack. We unpack. We unpack. Coming to you live. Boxingego unpack. Yeah. We unpack. We unpack. We unpack. Coming to you live. Dillian Whyte upset the WBC hasn't given him a title shot, and he says that Wilder should be skipped and he should get a fight with Tyson Fury straight away. What up, Fight World? It's your boy Ego, and I'm back with some more boxing. Make sure you smash the like button. Also subscribe to the channel for the latest and greatest in boxing. If you want to become part of the gang notification gang, please hit the bell icon. Shout out to the super chats, channel donations, the Venmo donations, the Cash App, and the Patreon family. We working. Now head over to Patreon right now. Got some upcoming things. You guys will see some of it very shortly. It'll debut on the channel. You don't want to miss it. Patreon, link in the description, or become a YouTube channel member. And to do that, just hit the join button next to the subscribe button. Now, I'm going to kind of recap what Dillian Whyte was saying. He did a recent Sky Sports interview, and he has expressed his concern and dismay with the WBC. He feels like they're dragging their feet, giving him a title shot. He says, I don't know, man. I don't know. Mauricio Suleiman, the president of the WBC, he says a lot of things, but he don't do a lot of things. I don't know, I have no idea what to say. It makes me angry, and it's frustrating that he's saying one thing, then he's doing another. Number one, Tyson Fury refused to fight me in a WBC mandated fight for the diamond belt. Secondly, they took my mandatory away and gave Tyson Fury the mandatory position. And after fighting Otto Wallin, who is a million ranked in the world, it's a joke. How can he come back and fight? What's the geezer's name? Tom Schwartz and Otto Wallin or whatever, and then end up being the mandatory challenger. After I've been fighting back-to-back top 10 contenders, they suspended my mandatory position without true cause or proper evidence or anything. It's a joke, and I don't care whether Tyson Fury or Wilder is contracted. Wilder's injured, so they should mandate Tyson Fury to fight me, as they've already done before. They mandated me to fight him for the diamond belt, then they took it away, but after Tyson Fury refused to fight me, he refused. It wasn't me that refused. I accepted the fight that was mandated by the WBC. Fury refused to fight me, and then after, I'm being punished, and they reward him for fighting Tom Schwartz after being off for 3 years. It's a joke, an absolute joke. End quote. Listen, I feel Dillian Whyte has misdirected anger, and I'm going to explain it. And, actually, I'm getting tired of explaining it. Check my old videos. I'll quickly, try to take you through this. Misdirected anger because he keeps getting at the WBC. He keeps pleading in these interviews and, trying to make this story of, utter disgust. And, he's trying to have fans pull out the violins and support him in the way of like, oh, I've been wronged, and, act like he's a victim in this all. And the reason I say it's misdirected is because I've went over this several times on my channel. Dillian Whyte needs to, in my opinion, use this same energy and venom and vitriol and nasty words he says, and the same approach, the same energy with his own promotional team, with Eddie Hearn, with Rematch Room. Because one, I'm still not over the fact that Barry Hearn referenced the company and Dillian Whyte and made a remark about the slave trade. That was out of pocket. Saying stuff like, oh, this is like the slave trade. Back in my day, we had to call him, whatever he was talking about. And he's like, now we call him Mr. Whyte. Isn't that something? Like, it's just weird behavior. Like, again, where is this energy for situations like that? This man, we just had the George Floyd situation in America, and I get it's not the UK, but situations in the world like that, you see the reaction, and you're allowing this blue-eyed white man in your face to make an awkward comment and you don't check that, but you have all this energy for Wilder and Andy Ruiz and the WBC. Weird to me, and it's weird that I see this kind of more with British fighters, British black fighters. Let me clarify that, and we don't see the same energy. Now, back to the misdirected anger. Dillian Whyte keeps like going in on Suleiman and the WBC, but if you think about it, he's only telling you a portion of it. He's saying, oh, me and Tyson Fury had a WBC. That's not even entirely what happened, right? Wilder fought Fury in December. It was a fun fight that ended in a draw. Wilder knocked him out, so it could have been a Wilder victory, had Jack Reese did the right thing, right? Either way, it was a draw. They were supposed to do an immediate rematch. The WBC said, hey, big fight. We'll get out of the way for them to do that. It's a big fight. It's a rematch that the fans want. So we're not ordering any mandatories. At the time, Dillian Whyte wasn't even the mandatory. He was the number one contender, which is a difference. The true mandatory was Dominic Breazeale, right? But they were going to put all of that mandatory business to the side at that time because they thought Wilder Fury 2 was next. But it wasn't next because Fury signed with ESPN and Top Rank, did this deal, was lucrative, and you see him on the Forbes list now, which just came out. The information came out, and Fury's leading the pack. So he made a lot of money, and he said, I'm going with ESPN, so I'm not, fighting Wilder straight away. So Wilder ended up fighting Dominic Breazeale, his true mandatory. Now, Dillian Whyte can't complain about Breazeale getting the mandatory because he fought Eric Molina and was the actual mandatory. Sky Sports has articles where this is written. One of them being the article where Dominic Breazeale called out Dillian Whyte. He says, I'm number one mandatory, and he's bound by his position with the WBC as the contender, so we could fight. Dominic Breazeale said this. So once again, misdirected anger. Breazeale called you out, said he was down to fight, and that will eliminate number one mandatories or whatever you thought was going on. And guess what? Eddie Hearn and Rematch Room and Team Dillian Whyte did not take Dominic Breazeale at face value or even negotiate. And if they did negotiate, they didn't do it deeply, and or more importantly, they didn't make the fight happen, right? He even said he would go to the UK for it. So that's a squandered opportunity. Breazeale actually fought Wilder and got knocked out, but he fought him. He got his opportunity. Dillian Whyte is complaining that he didn't get his opportunity, but he didn't fight Dominic Breazeale to settle the number one position. Because if he would have beat Dominic Breazeale like Wilder did and like Joshua did, then guess what? You think Wilder would have fought Breazeale coming off a loss to Dillian Whyte? Chances are he probably wouldn't have, and he could have forced his position. There's also been several final title eliminators that Dillian Whyte could have been a party to and taken part in, but his team had other plans, right? So to me, Dillian Whyte needs to be angry at his own promotion because they put you in this position. And I'm just grazing it because I went over it. The title eliminator, Kubrat Pulev. You could have been in line for a rematch with Joshua, who still has those belts and is about to fight Kubrat Pulev. But guess what? You and your promoter had lost the purse bid to a Bulgarian promoter, Epic Sports and Entertainment, and they were going to stage a Kubrat Pulev and Dillian Whyte fight in Bulgaria. Eddie Hearn didn't want to give the rights to Epic Sports so they can stage everything and give his fighter Dillian Whyte that opportunity, and probably didn't want him to fight in Bulgaria. So he pulled the plug on that, left Pulev in the dust, who is Joshua's current mandatory and is the name linked to fight Joshua next when this pandemic ends, and was the name linked to fight Joshua at least twice in his career now. He pulled out in one of them, but even before the pandemic, they had a scheduled fight, right? Whilst Dillian Whyte was scheduled to fight Povetkin, a guy that Joshua, knocked out. So why didn't you fight Pulev in Bulgaria? You instead and your promoter took what you believe is the money route and charged people a pay-per-view box office to fight Joseph Parker, who was coming off of a loss again to Joshua. So the real energy Dillian Whyte needs to have is towards Eddie Hearn, because Eddie Hearn keeps having you fight guys coming off of Joshua losses. You're fighting Povetkin. That's the plan, or was the plan. And a year or so ago, Joshua knocked Povetkin out. You fought against Joseph Parker directly off of the Joshua loss where he lost his belt. So you're getting the leftovers. So there's a lot of missed opportunity from Rematch Room, Team White, and Eddie Hearn. They're pulling him from final eliminators. They didn't fight Dominic Brazil and establish an actual number one. You know, the number one, actually, let me take that back. The one was already established. It was Brazil. But you're 1B, and you could have just cleared that up. There wouldn't have been a 1A, 1B. You wouldn't even have to worry about that. But you chose not to fight Brazil. Then, like I said, you choose not to fight a title eliminator in Pulev because you lose the purse bid, right? And you don't want to fight in Bulgaria. And that's a guy who's about to get a title shot. So you see why people are getting, like Brazil and people like Pulev, they're getting title shots. Pulev already fought for a title versus Klitschko, and now he's about to fight for another one with Joshua. They're getting title shots. You're the only one complaining. You're the only one saying 800 days, 1,000 days, and can't get in. But it's because Eddie Hearn's using you as a junkyard dog, and you're too naive, or you want to ignore it and not see it. It goes deeper. The WBC told Dillian Whyte and Eddie Hearn to fight Luis Ortiz in the final eliminator for Wilder's belt, or the WBC belt, since Tyson Fury now has it. Guess what? He didn't do it. They didn't fight in that eliminator with Luis Ortiz. But what they did give you was a Derek Chisora Part 2. A guy you had already beaten 2 years, even though I thought Dillian Whyte really lost that fight. On paper, it was a close fight, and on paper you had beat Derek Chisora. So why on earth would you fight Derek Chisora, a domestic level fight, instead of fighting a fight with Luis Ortiz, who is more known to different audiences because he has fought in America and gave Wilder a run for his money? That would have expanded your brand. But guess what? Eddie Hearn is not making any of those fights, right? So this same energy that Dillian Whyte has towards the WBC, this negative energy, you should really have it towards Eddie Hearn, because he's pulling you from eliminators and putting you off on pay-per-view against Joseph Parker coming off a loss. You're not going to get that much credit. He was coming directly off of a loss. He's no longer a champion. He's a good fighter, but there's only so much you're going to get, fighting him at that particular moment with no win column. You didn't fight Luis Ortiz, didn't fight Kubrat Pulev. Joshua was scheduled to fight Big Baby Miller. He failed a drug test, and they needed an opponent for New York. And you said to Talk Sport that you would fight Joshua in the rematch. Joshua at that time in New York last June, before the Ruiz fight, he was a champion. Guess what? Eddie Hearn, Dillian Whyte admits that Eddie Hearn didn't want to talk about it on the phone, and he changed the subject. So they gave Andy Ruiz an opportunity. So Dillian Whyte complaining, I feel absolutely no mercy and no sorrow, because this is decisions his team and his promotional people are making. Here's another thing. Dillian Whyte had opportunities, I don't know about now, but before, his contract was a case-by-case basis with Eddie Hearn. So he wasn't tied into a long-term Canelo DAZN contract where he had Canelo, unless DAZN breaks it or something and has an opt-out clause, Canelo got to give DAZN 10, 11 fights. That's the contract. Dillian Whyte wasn't under that with Eddie Hearn, and he was shopping deals with PBC and ESPN, and there were rumors that he might sign with ESPN or PBC, and guess what? He stayed with Eddie Hearn. So imagine if you would have got those offers and shopped the PBC deal, you might get the Wilder fight. You might get the Ruiz fights. You would be on the same thought. In fact, I know, because Deontay Wilder said, hey, I heard Dillian Whyte is meeting up with my people on PBC. Oh my God, come over here. It'll be easier to make the fight and we won't have to worry. And he said, I promise you'll get a shot. He said, go through Dillian Whyte, go through Luis Ortiz, and I promise you, you have my word, you'll get a shot. thereafter, because I could vouch for Luis Ortiz. You did none of this. Top Rank, they have Tyson Fury. He's the highest paid fighter from June of last year to June of this year or whatever. And you were shopping a deal with ESPN and you didn't sign with Top Rank. So they have those guys and you didn't do it. So to me, these are all missteps and miscalculations from Team Whyte, and they're just using him as a junkyard dog. You know, when Wilder was attacking Joshua verbally, Eddie Hearn used Dillian Whyte as a pawn, but he's not giving Dillian Whyte those opportunities. You know, when Joshua needed an opponent in New York, for example, why wasn't Dillian Whyte thought of? Dillian Whyte said he was training and he was ready for Joshua. But guess what? Eddie Hearn didn't think his cash cow would lose to Andy Ruiz, and he knew Dillian Whyte's style gives Joshua problems, and Dillian Whyte hurt Joshua in their first fight and beat him in the amateurs. So that was too much of a risk on late terms, 5-week notice. So he wasn't going to put Joshua in that type of fight. So you should really be, instead of being angry at Wilder and Andy Ruiz and WBC, Dillian Whyte truthfully should be mad at his own promotional people, because they've kept him from these title shots. You're blaming the WBC and making it look like, and we know the WBC, there's certain things that they do that we don't agree with, but this is not one of them. You've had several opportunities to secure your position as a mandatory, you know, and now you're complaining that fights like Wilder Fury, that's already a contracted thing. Why would the WBC move out of the way to make a less desired Fury versus Wilder fight? The other thing is, I don't know if it's a British thing, an English thing, but a lot of the British fighters and personalities like the Eddie Hearns and stuff like that, I see a sense of entitlement that just sounds crazy. The thing you have to understand is the rules, and at the end of the day, this is the WBC's belt. So they have lawyers and people that write up the jargon. Basically, the WBC, since it's their belt and they're the sanctioning body, and there's their craftsmanship making the belts, it's their, you know, whatever shop they're using, and their just their people, it's their stuff. So they have it written in the contract. I don't know if Dillian Whyte is aware of this, but he has to get hip to the business. They have veto power. It's their belt. So they have the power to veto anything and say, hey, for the greater good of boxing, we're doing this. And recent examples of what I'm saying, so you know it's true, that they have jurisdiction and power of their belt, is because boxing didn't really want franchise champions, but they just made it. Canelo and Vasyl Lomachenko. I would have preferred to see Canelo versus Charlo. I would have preferred to see Lomachenko versus Devin Haney. But guess what? They can vote on stuff like that, and they have it written and spelled out where ultimately, for the greater good of the sport, or what they say is the greater good of the sport, they have that option to veto, you know, and make sure whatever happens. So knowing that and knowing the business, I don't really think it's probably wise to be mouthing off and constantly berating the WBC and then complaining when they're not giving you a title shot. It doesn't really make sense to me. Maybe you guys can make it make sense in the comment section, but to me, that doesn't really make sense, that you're antagonizing the WBC and then you're mad that they're not giving you your way, on top of what I've said before, not doing your final eliminators. Those things, you would have secured your position a long time ago, you know. And the things like Eddie Hearn, people acting like they feel sorry, like the UK primarily, they're acting like they feel sorry for Dillian Whyte not getting his title shot, but they're not saying nothing to all the points that I've mentioned. They're not saying, hey, Joshua, he lost his opponent in Big Baby Miller. How come, answer this one question, why didn't Eddie Hearn use an in-house fighter with history of bad blood and give DAZN Joshua versus Whyte Part 2 in New York? Who cares? Who cares? If you have 10,000 Brits coming for an Andy Ruiz fight, then why can't they come to New York to watch Josh? Your whole card was a UK card. You had Caleb Smith on the card. Katie Taylor was in a good fight, which she lost. Delphine Persoon, but they gave it to Katie Taylor, right? So you had a bunch of UK fighters on that Joshua Ruiz card. and you had UK presence allegedly in terms of fans that came out. So what's the difference? Why didn't you just make Dillian Whyte AJ? Because you didn't want that risk, and you didn't think Ruiz would win, and you had a cherry pick in Ruiz, but that cherry pick wasn't ripe and it was bitter, and Ruiz had other plans, and that led to a sequel because he stopped Joshua. You knew Dillian Whyte and Joshua, that's a tough fight for him, so you didn't want your cash cow to possibly look bad or get beaten by Dillian Whyte. But the irony in it all is that he got beat by, even worse, a PBC fighter who was brought in late terms, didn't have this bad blood, looked out of shape, and looked much shorter than Dillian Whyte and AJ. So it was just an overall better look. So the DAZN curse continues. I feel no sympathy for Dillian Whyte not getting a title shot, because ultimately it's his promotional team and his team, the way they've moved and the decisions they've made, that have allowed for him not to get that shot. You see what I'm saying? Dillian Whyte, he had multiple chances at a title or to better his chances of getting one, and they did not follow through with those. So now you're lashing out at one point Wilder, but then he just lost. Now you're blaming Tyson Fury. And the funny thing is, you got to understand the business. At the end of the day, it's not about what you feel is right. You really think the WBC is gonna like breach a contract or make Fury breach a contract with Wilder, disappoint PBC and Top Rank just to appease you in a smaller fight? They get money being involved with the bigger fight. This is common sense. So Dillian Whyte and Tyson Fury is a smaller fight than Wilder 3 and Tyson Fury. So I don't understand from any shape or form or fashion why Dillian Whyte thinks that he would take precedence over that. That's just common sense. And then again, when you're speaking out against them constantly, and then you're expecting the alley-oop or a favor from him, it's kind of a weird game plan. But that's my thoughts. We unpack. So if you enjoyed this video and want more content like this on the channel, you can show your appreciation by going to the PayPal donate button or the YouTube support button, and you can donate any amount that you feel is equivalent to the value of this video. Much more to come. Thank you guys for your support. Boxingego, the future of boxing.